Doctors and scientists are usually highly respected, the former for literally saving our lives, and the latter for working to advance human knowledge and improve life for mankind. At least that is what most doctors and scientists do or try to do most of the time. This is especially true for doctors. They are sworn to the Hippocratic Oath. This oath is one of the oldest binding documents in history, and was written by Hippocrates. The oath is still held sacred by physicians, to treat the ill to the best of one's ability, to preserve a patient's privacy, to teach the secrets of medicine to the next generation, and so on. Scientists may not have the same morally binding oaths to protect humankind. However, it is generally assumed that scientists are a force of good in the world, inventing technology to assist civilization and to just be generally beneficial. This is not the case for the evil people, scientists and doctors alike. In this list, whether it's for selfish gain or scientific curiosity, there have been many corrupt humans that committed atrocities in the name of science and learning. Following are 30 things about some of World War II's more evil doctors and scientists. Number 20. Dr. Ishi murdered thousands in a variety of gruesome ways. During Dr. Ishi's evil experiments, thousands were killed with a host of deadly pathogens, ranging from the bubonic plague to botulism, to which prisoners were exposed in a variety of ways. Victims were injected with bacteria, had it added to their food and drink, or it was smeared on their clothes, to test the effectiveness of aerial dispersal of diseases. Bombs full of gangrene or other deadly bacteria were exploded over prisoners. Ishi and Unit 731 subjected prisoners to other atrocities as well. Victims were starved, exposed to extremes of temperatures, bombarded with X-rays, killed in giant centrifuges, boiled alive or even dissected alive. Thanks to the thousands of test subjects killed in the camps of Unit 731, plus the hundreds of thousands Chinese civilians outside who were exposed to the plague, Ishi brought biological warfare to new heights or lows. By 1945, even as Japan was reeling on her last legs, she still had a horrific last card to play: weaponized deadly pathogens. Ishi and Unit 731 had encased the bubonic plague, botulism, anthrax, smallpox, cholera, and other diseases into bombs that were routinely dropped on Chinese soldiers and civilians. Number 19. This evil doctor planned to infect America with the plague. If Dr. Ishi had had his way, U.S. civilians would have experienced firsthand what his victims in China had endured. On March 26, 1945, he finalized plans for Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night to attack America with biological weapons. The operation called for 5x400 long-range submarines, each carrying 3 Ishi M6A1 Siren float planes, to cross the Pacific Ocean. Upon reaching the U.S. West Coast, the submarines were to launch the float planes, loaded with plague-infected fleas, to attack San Diego. As one of the pilots put it in 1998, I was told directly by Shiro Ishi of the kamikaze mission Cherry Blossoms at Night, which was named by Ishi himself. I was a leader of a squad of 17. I understood that the mission was to spread contaminated fleas in the enemy's base, and contaminate them with plague. The operation was scheduled for September 22, 1945, but the atomic bombing of Japan in August ended the war. Japan formally surrendered on September 2, less than 3 weeks before the scheduled launch date of Cherry Blossoms at Night. Number 18. Despite murdering hundreds of thousands, Dr. Ishi was never held accountable for his evil deeds. Dr. Shiro Ishi's evil experiments killed hundreds of thousands of Chinese from bubonic plague, anthrax, cholera, and other diseases, according to the most reliable recent estimate, from the 2002 International Symposium on the Crimes of Biological Warfare. The number of his victims might have been as high as 580,000, yet Ishi never faced a war crimes tribunal, nor was he ever prosecuted for his horrific deeds. In August 1945, just before the Soviets conquered Manchuria, he evacuated Unit 731 back to Japan, destroyed most traces of his camps, and had all remaining prisoners, plus 600 workers, murdered. The Soviets nonetheless captured some documents, which they used in their own biological warfare program. After the war, American microbiologists deemed Ishi's work absolutely invaluable. It could never have been obtained in the United States because of scruples attached to experiments on humans, so he cut a deal to avoid prosecution, in exchange for sharing the results of his experiments with the U.S. military. Although Unit 731's victims included American POWs, General Douglas MacArthur, who ran the occupation of the Japan, officially denied the existence of any Japanese experiments upon Americans. Ishi lived a free man until his death in 1959 from throat cancer. Number 17. This evil researcher went from a prestigious Rockefeller Fellowship to conducting horrific human experiments for the Nazis. Prominent German medical researcher Hubertus Strughold, born 1898, died 1986, served as the Luftwaffe's chief aeromedical researcher from 1935 until the end of World War II. After earning a medical degree in the 1920s, Strughold got into the emerging field of aviation medicine. He won a Rockefeller Foundation fellowship and traveled to the United States in 1928, where he conducted aviation medicine research at the University of Chicago and Case Western University. Upon his return to Germany, he became a professor at Friedrich Wilhelm University in Berlin. In 1935, Strughold was hired by the Nazis as director of the Research Institution for Aviation Medicine, a think tank sponsored by Hermann Göring's Ministry of Aviation. Strughold's institution conducted pioneering research on the physical effects of supersonic flight and high altitudes. When World War II began in 1939, the institution was absorbed into the Luftwaffe, and Strughold was commissioned as an officer, eventually becoming a colonel. During the war, he conducted horrific human experiments on prisoners that got many of his test subjects killed. Those activities were swept under the rug, however, and he was brought to the U.S. under the aegis of Operation Paperclip. Number 16. Hubertus Strughold conducted sadistic experiments on concentration camp prisoners. During World War II, Hubertus Strughold participated in medical studies that used inmates from Dachau concentration camp as guinea pigs. Test subjects were subjected to surgeries without anesthetics, immersed in frozen water to examine the effects of hypothermia, and placed in air pressure chambers. After the war, investigators at the Nuremberg war trials listed Strughold as one of 13 persons, firms, or individuals implicated in the Dachau medical atrocities. However, the U.S. government figured he possessed valuable information and experience, so he never faced charges for his evil deeds. Instead, Strughold was brought to America, where he held high-ranking medical positions in the U.S. Air Force as head of its School of Aviation Medicine in Texas. He then worked for NASA as head of its Department of Space Medicine. Strughold conducted pioneering work in the physical and psychological effects of manned spaceflight, and his efforts helped get American astronauts to successfully walk on the moon. Because of his contributions to the field, Strughold became known as the father of space medicine. Number 15. The controversy surrounding a prestigious award named after an evil doctor. Since 1963, the Space Medicine Association has given out an annual Hubertus Strughold Award to top physicians or scientists for outstanding work in space medicine. That led to controversy when Strughold's evil wartime activities became more widely known. His reputation took a serious hit when U.S. Army intelligence reports from 1945 listing him as wanted for war crimes were declassified. A 1958 Justice Department investigation had exonerated him, while a second inquiry launched by the Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS for short, was abandoned in 1974. A third investigation was opened in 1983, but was abandoned when Strughold died in 1986. During his lifetime, Strughold denied having ever participated in or even known of the Dachau concentration camp's human experiments. For years, most doctors and scientists in Strughold's field took him at his word, and he remained a revered figure. However, things grew increasingly awkward as more and more evidence kept emerging after Strughold's death of his wartime medical atrocities, not least of them experiments conducted by his institute on young children from a psychiatric asylum, that made the award bearing his name an increasingly controversial honor. Number 14. The visionary who took humanity to space and killed thousands of slave workers. It is hard to tell whether, on balance, Werner von Braun, born 1912, died 1977, was good or evil. On the one hand, he was a visionary genius and a brilliant engineering manager who is rightly credited as the father of America's space program. We went to the moon in large part thanks to him. If the day ever comes when humans set foot on Mars and colonize the Red Planet, it will also be thanks to von Braun in large part. Humanity owes him a huge debt for his contributions to the space sciences. On the other hand, the man was a war criminal. He was responsible for the deaths of thousands of slave workers, who perished while toiling on his rockets in atrocious conditions, of which he was fully aware. During World War II, von Braun was an SS Sturmbannführer, equivalent to an American major, who developed and oversaw the manufacture of the V-2 rockets, the world's first ballistic missiles. His rockets, carrying a 1-ton explosive warhead, rained down terror and killed thousands, most of them civilians, in London, Antwerp, and other cities. Number 13. After World War II, the space pioneer went to great length to whitewash his Nazi past. Werner von Braun pretended to have been an oblivious scientist, too engrossed in his blueprints, calculations, and other pointy-head work, to fully comprehend the horrors of the evil regime he served. In reality, he had been quite comfortable with the Third Reich, the Nazis, and the SS, until late in the war. Far from being oblivious to Hitler's horrors, von Braun was personally involved in Nazi atrocities, and was a direct, hands-on participant in war crimes. Among other things, he personally supervised the manufacturing of rockets, using tens of thousands of slave workers. An estimated 20,000 slaves toiling for von Braun's rockets died of starvation, maltreatment, or were murdered by their guards while building his rockets. He was often at the slave labor facilities, and had first-hand knowledge of the horrific workplace conditions. After the war, he was one of the first Germans secretly moved to the U.S. in Operation Paperclip. The U.S. Army put him to work to develop its intermediate-range ballistic missile program, and he developed the rocket that launched America's first space satellite. When NASA was created, von Braun joined it as director of the Marshall Space Flight Center. Number 12. Did Werner von Braun's good outweigh his evil? Werner von Braun was put in charge of the Saturn V rockets that sent the Apollo program spacecraft to the Moon. In recognition of his services, he was awarded the National Medal of Science in 1975. Von Braun thus presents a conundrum and a moral dilemma. He is a pioneer who undoubtedly contributed much to the advancement of mankind in the space sciences. If our species ever becomes a multiplanetary one, something many scientists see as the only safeguard against our extinction in the next millennium, it will be thanks in large part to von Braun. It is no exaggeration to say that von Braun was history's most important and influential rocket engineer and space advocate, so there is no question that the man did a lot of good in his life. However, does that absolve him of his personal responsibility for having gone along with the Nazis? Does it wash away the stain of having been a loyal Nazi and member of the SS? Does it cleanse him of the evil of having been responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of slave workers who perished while building his precious rockets? Was Werner von Braun a Nazi villain, space hero, or both? Number 11. An evil doctor who got away with atrocities. German Dr. Walter Schreiber, born 1893, died 1970, was a prominent epidemiologist and highly regarded biology professor in the peaceful interlude between World War I and the even bloodier Second World War. He had been a medical student when World War I erupted in 1914, at which point he voluntarily enlisted in the German army. He was wounded early in the conflict, and after recovering from his injuries he resumed his studies, then served as a military doctor until World War I ended. After the war, he became a professor of biology and hygiene. In the interwar years, Dr. Schreiber became one of the world's foremost experts on epidemics. During the Nazi era, he introduced the use of lethal phenol injections as a quick and convenient means of executing troublemakers. During World War II, he rose to the rank of Major General in the Wehrmacht Medical Service. He was also a member of the Reich Research Council, in which capacity he conducted cruel and sadistic medical experiments upon prisoners. Unfortunately, except for a brief period of imprisonment, Schreiber was never held accountable for his evil medical practices. Number 10. This doctor froze live human subjects and deliberately infected others with gangrene. During World War II, Dr. Walter Schreiber conducted a series of cruel experiments on prisoners in the infamous Auschwitz concentration and death camp. His evil practices included freezing his victims in order to examine the effects of extreme cold. He conducted other sadistic medical experiments on female prisoners in Ravensbrück concentration camp. They included cutting open the victims' legs and deliberately infecting them with gangrene, then giving them bone transplants. Subjects of his experiments usually died, but only after suffering prolonged agonies. At war's end, Dr. Schreiber was captured by the Red Army and was taken to the Soviet Union. There, he was held in the infamous Lubyanka prison in poor conditions. His conditions improved when his captors discovered his true identity and put him to work providing medical care to high-ranking German prisoners. He was produced as a witness at the Nuremberg trials to testify against Hitler's second-in-command, Hermann Göring, who had been in charge of Germany's biological weapons development. Number 9. A sadistic monster who escaped accountability. After testifying against Hermann Göring in the Nuremberg trials, Dr. Walter Schreiber was shielded from accountability for his medical atrocities. Because the victors found him useful, he ended up getting hired by the CIA and the U.S. military, who saw to it that he escaped punishment. In 1948, he evaded his Soviet handlers and made it to the West, where he was hired by the U.S. military and the CIA to work as chief medical doctor in Camp King, a clandestine POW interrogation site in Germany. Dr. Schreiber was sent to the U.S. in 1951 as part of Operation Paperclip, and was put to work at the Air Force School of Medicine in Texas. However, the publication of newspaper articles soon thereafter about his medical atrocities on behalf of the Nazis led to a public outcry. So his intelligence handlers relocated him and his family to Argentina in 1952. There, Dr. Schreiber worked as an epidemiologist in a research laboratory, until his death from a heart attack in 1970. Number 8. The evil French doctor of World War II. Unlike others in this list who committed evil on behalf of their governments, French doctor Marcel-André Henri Félix Pateau, born 1897, died 1946, turned to evil on his own hook for his own gratification. It is unclear just what exactly caused Pateau to turn into an evil homicidal psychopath, but the signs were there from early on, if somebody had bothered to look. Unfortunately, nobody bothered to look. Pateau was an out-and-out delinquent at an early age. When he was 11 years old, he propositioned a girl for sex in school, and took his father's firearm to class and discharged it. In his teens, Pateau robbed a postbox, and was arrested and charged with theft and destruction of public property. The charges were dismissed when a psychiatric evaluation revealed mental instability, and a judge deemed him mentally unfit to stand trial. Despite such an unpromising background, Pateau actually managed to finish medical school and become a doctor. However, instead of ending his days as a respected retired MD, Pateau ended his days face down on the guillotine, after he was convicted and sentenced to death for murdering dozens of people. Number 7. From delinquent child to mentally troubled soldier. Growing up, Marcel Pateau was a problem child. Various incidents of violent behavior and numerous brushes with the law got him expelled from multiple schools. As a result, the young delinquent was forced to complete his education in a special academy for troubled youth who could not be handled by regular schools. When World War I broke out, Pateau joined the French army. However, between the horrors of trench warfare, in which he was wounded and gassed, and his already troubled psyche, Pateau suffered a nervous breakdown. He was sent to a series of rest homes, where he got arrested multiple times for stealing morphine, wallets, blankets, photos, and letters. He ended up in military jail for a while, before he was sent to a psychiatric hospital. There, Pateau was diagnosed with a variety of mental illnesses. The signs of evil were there. Some examiners thought that Pateau was a menace, and wanted him institutionalized, but they were overruled. In hindsight, their recommendations should have been heeded. Eventually, Pateau was discharged from the military with a disability pension. Number 6. Despite a track record of violent psychosis that hinted at the evil to come, Marcel Pateau managed to become a doctor. It is remarkable that Marcel Pateau managed to become a doctor in the first place, considering that he was certifiably crazy. Indeed, there were multiple psychiatric diagnoses that declared him to be a violent psychopath. However, beneath the nuttiness, the man was actually pretty intelligent, especially when it came to book smarts. After World War I ended, he joined an accelerated educational program intended to benefit veterans who had spent a significant chunk of their youth in the trenches instead of in university lecture halls. Pateau ended up completing medical school in 8 months, did an internship and residency in a psychiatric hospital of all places, and in 1921, received his medical degree and license. He moved to and opened up a practice in the small town of Villeneuve-sur-Yonne, in Burgundy. From the start, Pateau was a sketchy MD. He gained a reputation for supplying illegal drugs. He was himself an addict, and performing illegal abortions. When he was not keeping office hours, Dr. Pateau kept himself occupied with things like petty thefts. Number 5. This evil doctor got elected to office the same year he murdered his first victim. As with many evil psychopaths, Dr. Marcel Pateau could be quite charming when he wanted to be. It is unclear just when he got started on his career as a serial killer. Many believe that his first victim was probably Louise Delaveau, the daughter of one of his patients, with whom he had an affair. She vanished in 1926, and witnesses recalled seeing the town's doctor loading a big trunk into his car at the time of her disappearance. The authorities investigated, but eventually concluded that Pateau's former lover had simply run away. Although there was a whole lot of shadiness surrounding him, Dr. Pateau was a popular figure in Villeneuve-sur-Yonne, and he capitalized on that. The same year as his ex-mistress' disappearance, Pateau turned to local politics, ran for mayor, won the election. While in office, he embezzled town funds, engaged in sketchy financial dealings, and continued on with his petty thefts. Eventually, an investigation was opened that ended with his conviction for fraud and suspension from office in 1930. He was forced to resign soon thereafter. Number 4. Marcel Pateau worked out his stress by murdering people. Shortly after Dr. Marcel Pateau was forced to resign as mayor of Villeneuve-sur-Yonne, he got rid of some of the stress and worked out some of his frustrations by murdering one of his patients. Not long thereafter, another patient, who had accused the former mayor of crimes, died in suspicious circumstances, despite the evidence, including a conviction of corruption, plus mounting indicia of criminality. Dr. Pateau retained his popularity. Indeed, upon his suspension from office as mayor, the entire town council resigned in protest. In the autumn of 1931, Dr. Pateau was elected as a councillor of the Yonne department. However, scandal and the whiff of scandal followed him wherever he went. Within just a few months of winning the election, Dr. and Councilman Pateau was convicted of stealing electricity from his town. Once again, he was forced to resign from public office, so he decided to start a new life in Paris, moving to and opening a medical practice in the French capital. Number 3. During World War II, this doctor had a good Dr. Jekyll side that was eclipsed by his evil Mr. Hyde persona. Paris agreed with Dr. Pateau. He used fake credentials to attract patients, and before long, he had established a thriving practice in the 9th arrondissement. It helped that his office gained a reputation as a pill mill, handing out controlled drug prescriptions to all and sundry, nor did it hurt that the doctor was more than willing to perform illegal abortions for the right price. However, despite his thriving and highly lucrative practice, made even more lucrative by his tax evasion, Pateau persisted with the thefts, petty and grand, of anything that was not nailed down. In 1936 he was institutionalized for kleptomania, but was released the following year after France was defeated and conquered by the Nazis in 1940. French citizens were drafted to toil in Germany as forced laborers. Dr. Pateau helped labor draft evaders by furnishing them with fake medical disability documents. He also treated returning workers who had been sent back from Germany, broken down and in poor health. That was his good side. The Dr. Jekyll part, unfortunately, it was eclipsed by the doctor's evil Mr. Hyde side. Number 2. Dr. Pateau exploited the French resistance to indulge in serial killing. Dr. Pateau claimed to have been a member of the French resistance. According to him, he developed secret weapons that killed Nazis without leaving a trace, planted booby traps, met Allied commanders, and worked with an anti-fascist cell. It was all bunk. What was not bunk was his evil scheme to profit from the Holocaust by murdering dozens of Jews in order to steal from them. Using the alias Dr. Eugene Pateau claimed to have an escape route to get those wanted by the Nazis or the collaborationist Vichy French government to safety outside of France. Charging 25,000 francs per person, Dr. Eugene promised to get fugitives to Argentina or other South American countries via an escape route that went through Portugal. There was no escape route. Accomplices led victims desperate to escape the Germans, particularly Jews, but also resistance members and ordinary criminals, to Pateau's house. There, he told them that Argentina required that immigrants be vaccinated against diseases. Pateau then injected them not with a vaccine, but with cyanide. In addition to the payment already received, the English ring seized whatever other valuables the victims had. They then destroyed their corpses in Pateau's basement, buried them on his property, or disposed of them elsewhere. Number 1. This evil doctor met his end beneath the guillotine's blade. Things began to unravel for the evil Dr. Marcel Pateau in March of 1944, when his neighbors complained of foul stenches coming from his house, and of copious smoke coming out of his chimney. Upon entering the house, authorities discovered a roaring coal stove fire in the basement, and more human remains were found in a canvas bag, and in a quicklime pit in the backyard. Police also found clothing, goods, and suitcases belonging to numerous victims. Pateau was not at home, however, and he went on the lam. Adopting an alias, he joined the resistance, for real this time. During the liberation of Paris later that year, he rose to captain in charge of counterintelligence and prisoner interrogations. However, his real identity was eventually uncovered, and he was arrested. Marcel Pateau was eventually charged with 27 murders for profit. Although he might have killed over 60 people, prosecutors estimated that he made over 200 million francs from his scheme. Tried in 1946, he was found guilty, sentenced to death, and guillotined.